Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensle Lowrance, and I'm your host today. I host and produce this show in partnership with fellow writer Joe Moldover. This is our 86th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Thank you for being here. And our guest today is Weina Dai Randel, whose latest novel, The Last Rose of Shanghai, is out now. Dun, dun, dun. Weina, I just said your name wrong, didn't I? Weina.
No, you got it right. You got it.
I got it
I'm
right.
so proud of you.
Practice question in advance. All right. Well, you're generous. We're very glad that Weina's here. So let me tell you about her, and we're going to talk about her wonderful new book. So she is the award-winning author of 3 novels: The Last Rose of Shanghai, The Moon in the Palace, and The Empress of Bright Moon, which is a historical duology about Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor. Fascinated by that. Weina is the winner of the RWA Rita Award. She's a National Jewish Book Awards finalist, a Goodreads Choice Awards semifinalist, and an RT Book Reviewer's Choice nominee. Her books have been translated into multiple languages and sold worldwide. She has an MFA or an MA in English from Texas Women's University. She's worked as a subject matter expert for Southern New Hampshire University's MFA program, and she's an adjunct professor for Eastfield College. After living in Texas for many years, she is now a proud resident of Massachusetts, where she moved recently with her family. Welcome, Weina. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Yay. Thank you so much, Kimberly. You are awesome. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. I'm thrilled to be here.
We're very happy to have you. So congratulations on The Last Rose of Shanghai. The reviews of your book are great. Let's see, what did Booklist say? Booklist said, fans of sweeping, dramatic World War II epics that are rich in historical detail will be enthralled. That's such a great description. So can you tell our audience members who have not yet had the chance to read this book, but who will soon, what is The Last Rose of Shanghai about?
Well, in a nutshell, The Last Rose of Shanghai is a love story between a wealthy Chinese nightclub owner and a Jewish refugee who was a pianist. So, during World War II, from 1938 to 1940s, about 18,000 Jews, they had no place to go, and they all ended up in Shanghai. And this is the book that describes their plight in Shanghai, how they survived the war in Europe, and how they managed to make a living in Shanghai while it was under the Japanese occupation.
I have to say, I have read a lot about World War II over the years, but I never had heard the story of Jews that escaped the Nazis by emigrating to Shanghai. I had never heard that before.
Oh, well, I think a lot of people are saying that, Kimberly. They were like, oh my goodness, I've never heard of that. That there were Jews in Shanghai. They did not know that. And World War II, and 18,000 Jews fled to Shanghai. This is like not very well known at all. And I actually did not know this part of story either. So I got this idea when I was in Shanghai. I worked there and I studied there, and the school was located in Hongkou district, and I passed a building, a red brick building, like every morning, and the building said it's Moses Church. So, but now I know it's actually not church, it's a synagogue. But in Chinese, church and synagogue, same thing. So I also heard when I was in Shanghai, they said during World War II, a lot of Jewish refugees, they were starving, they were abandoned by those Americans and British and all those people in the Shanghai settlement, and they had no place to go. They couldn't understand Chinese, and they had no food. So the local Shanghainese would throw loaves of bread into the alley to feed those refugees. And, this is like a beautiful story. I I actually did not know if it happened or not, because in my mind I doubted it. Chinese people actually did not eat bread at all. Most likely they would throw rice balls in there instead of bread. But anyway, this story just stuck in my mind. And after I married an American. He's Jewish too, but when I married him, I did not know he was Jewish. And the story, my personal story, was like my parents did not really like the idea that I would marry a foreigner. So there were some kind of things going on. So I thought, hey, maybe I can write stuff like this, a Chinese woman and a Jewish man was, say, 1940s, and then with the refugees, with the World War II as background and stuff like that. So this is how everything started. And one of my friends, I was in Dallas then, and she was like, "Wayne, you would be the perfect person to write it. You basically about Jewish people. You probably speak a little bit Yiddish too, and you grew up in China. You're Chinese yourself." So I was greatly encouraged, and I dove into research, and I found out some very little known pieces, like the Jewish people became stateless. They became the people with no countries, and they were absolutely living in the cracks. So I thought it was fascinating. So I decided to write a story.
I love that there are elements of your personal life that you can draw upon to write this story, because you would think that this story is like something that happened in the past. It has no relevance today. But this idea of people of many different cultures living in this very small, I don't know how small Shanghai was in the 40s, but because the book has Germans, it has British, it has Americans, it has Chinese, it has Japanese, and I'm sure many other countries, of people of nationalities all living in this one space under these very stressful circumstances. Japanese are occupying China. People are emigrating and losing their homelands. So there's a lot of contradictory perspectives in one space. And yet these people find a way to coexist to the best that they can. And then these characters fall in love. And as someone who is Chinese, American, it feels like there's a lot that you could draw upon in your own love story for the love story in this book. Did that feel, do you have an emotional connection to that? Did that feel comfortable? Did that feel strange? What is that like as a writer to pull from your own life like that?
I think for me, though, the main idea was the clash of traditions. Because Chinese have certain perceptions about women, and about women should not engage into business like in 1930s, and yet IE was the nightclub owner. And also Chinese people have certain ideas about, hey, Chinese women should marry Chinese, not the foreigners, especially the foreigners. They invaded China in 19th century, and they occupied parts of China. So these kind of ideas, and of course there were more traditions that Chinese people, you as part of the society, as a family, you needed to adhere to. And another, for the Jewish refugees, is that dilemma would be the survival. Because Ernest arrived in Shanghai and he was 19 years old, and he had his sister to look after, but he couldn't speak Chinese. He had no families there. And in 1940 Shanghai, the Americans were looking after themselves, and they were just alone. So it was very difficult for them to find a job, for Ernest to even find a job. And of course, his mind was all about his family too, because his parents were left in Germany, in Berlin, and he worried about them. He waited for them every Sunday, going to work, waiting to see them disembark from the ocean liner. And then he was only 90 years old too. So it was like, whoa.
I think that there's a lot that you touch upon in this book, these very big emotions, like this Ernest, hoping his parents would be reunited with himself and his sister. So this sort of big issues of like loss, and what it's like to have your your country of origin. In Ernest's case, he's from Germany, and Germany disavows the Jews during his time, and what it's like to lose your homeland, like these big issues of like, what is home, right? What is family? How do we find that? How do we survive? So all these really like anti-Semitism, the war, poverty, you have all these huge issues in the book. But I also was really drawn to these small moments between the characters, how they find connection, how they try so hard to make art in a time of great strife. So the main characters, Ernest and Ai, did I get it right?
Yes, you got it right.
They fall in love because they both have a common interest in jazz and in music.
Yeah.
And Ernest is also a photographer. So I found that part, the sort of commitment to finding art, making art, even in terrible circumstances, that element of the book really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that? The sort of what art provides these characters in this time of great unrest and
oh yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. Kimberly, you captured the story so well, and you really got into the writer's mind and the creative process. Bravo, that's amazing. So thank you so much. So from the very beginning, I thought Ernest has to be a musician because I was a nightclub owner. For them to connect, they have to have something in common. Otherwise, it's very difficult for somebody to actually not to fall in love, just to start a talk. It would be very difficult. So Ernest's background is from he was from Berlin. He was trained classical music type, and he was, but because he was in Berlin, he was not allowed to perform in music halls when the situation got very bad. So when he came to Shanghai, he actually did not expect to start his pianist career, but he was very into photograph. So that was something I really did a research, like what was popular then in 1930s. If you grew up in 1930s, what would you be interested in? Nowadays my kids get interested in video games, right? So, if you are like 16, 15, what would you be interested in? So it turns out to be photograph. And he was given a Leica when he had the bat mitzvah. So he used that everywhere, and he took pictures and like that. So I think hobbies like that and your training makes you part of a person. And that kind of, in a way, framed this character. He has this artistic mind, and he's very good at playing the piano, but he was just not given this opportunity in Berlin. But then when he came to Shanghai, he decided to show off and play his piano. Not intentionally, but he just wanted to attract some attention from the girl he came across. So he just started to play the piano, and that actually got him a job. So that was very unexpected.
Yes, you would think that being an artist would be a liability in a time when you're desperate for work, right? But in his case, it actually becomes an asset.
Yes,
it becomes a way for him to support himself and his sister. So one other thing that is in this book that I thought was really interesting was there are a lot of real life people in this book.
Yes.
And I didn't realize how many until after, and I was like Googling it. And but, they have a couple real life people. One is Emily Hahn, who's an American journalist.
Yeah.
Another is Victor Sassoon, who is a very successful business person. And they all have, and there are many others, and they have roles in the lives of the characters. And I was so curious, what is it like to write fiction, but base it in a real time with real people? How do you navigate incorporating real life people in this story? What are like the things you thought about, limitations or sort of opportunities that provides?
So let's start with Sir Victor Sassoon. And by the way, I'm just still fascinated by him. And I'm not the only one. Many people are fascinated by him, by the way. So when I started research about him, I learned he was considered the richest person in Asia in 1930s. And he owned like 18,000 properties in Shanghai. 18,000.
That's amazing.
Think about it. Like, it's like only 18,000 properties in Boston. Somebody like that. But his family background was absolutely fascinating too. He actually did not build up his business. His father did. David Sassoon did, and they started the business in India, but with opium trade, and they got very, very wealthy because of that. And then they moved the family business from India to Shanghai when things in India became very desperate. And Sir Victor Sassoon had a very great mind. He had all these assets and all these millions of dollars. He started to transform Shanghai from a swamp to a metropolitan city by building many mansions, and many of those mansions and buildings are still in existence today in Shanghai. So if you go to Shanghai and you walk on the Bund, and you will see all those like Gothic buildings, Baroque buildings, and Art Deco buildings. Some of them were owned by him. So he lost all of those buildings, 18,000 properties, when the war ended in 1945, and he transferred everything to the Bahamas, and he fled there too. So for me, I needed to put him uh, in this time frame, like 1940s to 1945, and also decided to capture a sense of his character, what kind of man really he was. He was really into three things. The first was money, and then photography, and then women. He was into those three things, and a showed in the book too. And one thing though, I really want to. I did lots of research about that, and I read like Shanghai Grand, and they had a very good description about him, even including the food that he ate, because he grew up in India, so he was very into Indian food. And also one book I looked into was The Last Kings of Shanghai by Jonathan Kaufman. Oh my goodness, that book, it was brilliant. And he was the book was called The Last Kings of Shanghai, and Jonathan Kaufman talked about Sir Victor Sassoon and the other Kodori family in Shanghai. They were two Jews in Shanghai, but they were like kings in Shanghai. They built many buildings. They were into every trade basically. So it was fascinating. But as a writer, you have to invent the characters in a way, make them authentic to the historical figure, and also fascinating and fit your story, or becomes an obstacle to your characters in the book. So in this way, Emily Hung came through. Emily Hung was also in Shanghai in 1930s, but actually when the book started in 1940s, Emily Hung already left Shanghai, went to Hong Kong. But it's okay. So far, nobody has ever pointed this finger at me yet. But
It's
I really,
right?
really admire Emily Hung. Kimberly, she published 50 books,
Yeah.
more than 50 books. She was amazing. She was a true trailblazer. She was the woman who actually made a living on her own talent by publishing, supporting herself with her own royalties and everything. That was incredible. But she had a very interesting character, and she was not very liked by many people, not even Hemingway. She didn't like Hemingway either, by the way. The dislike, I guess, was mutual. But in Shanghai, though, she was liked by many writers in Shanghai, and they commented on her, and they liked her beauty, and they also liked her asset ton. They also liked her ability to mingle with the locals. So I wanted to write Emily in the book. So in a way, she would be a friend, but not really exactly a friend because of the different cultural difference between Emily and IE. So
I'm fascinated to hear that she and Hemingway didn't like one another, because one of the things what I read about her was that she was a contemporary of his, and I wondered if they found one another along the way. So that definitely makes me want to learn more about her. And I really loved how in the back of the book you have for more reading. There's a reading list. So people who read the Last Rose of Shanghai and feel like I did, like, oh, I have so many questions, I want to know more. You gave them even a great list to start with. I think that's terrific. I know historical fiction people love that, right? If you want to dive into a story and stay in it longer. So that's terrific. I want to ask you about indie bookstores, because that's usually what we do on this show. So for our repeat viewers, you know that typically we host an author in conversation with a bookseller. Today we're doing something a little different. I really wanted to talk with Weina, and she's new to the Boston area, and you've had this opportunity, you told me about, as you've gotten to know Boston, you've been getting to know the indie bookstore scene here. And so I wonder what that's like as a writer moving to a new city. We have so many bookstores here in the Boston area. We sort of like, you can trip over them. They're everywhere. They're fantastic. We've had a number on the show, and we're going to put links below to some of the interviews we've done, from Belmont Books to Harvard Bookstore to Buttonwood Books to An Unlikely Story and the Bookshop at Beverly Farms and Brookline.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We've had so many different bookstores on the show in the Boston area. But as a new writer, moving as a new writer to Boston, what's it like as a writer kind of getting to know bookstores? What do you, what's the process like to walk inside and to look around and to find your books? What do you say to booksellers when you approach them if you want them to carry your book? We have a lot of writers who watch the show. What advice might you give someone who's trying to make those connections with bookstores?
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, Kimberly. So I'm really happy you asked me this question, because I can't wait to tell you about my experience with bookstores in Boston. So before I moved here, I lived in Flower Mound, Texas, which was like 45 minutes to the only indie store in the area. And they didn't have my books, by the way, but that was fine. When I came here, I didn't have any ideas about how many bookstores you have here. First bookstore I visited was Harvard Bookstore in Harvard Square. Oh my goodness, I still remember that. I took my kids and I walked in, and it was like everything was just so colorful and so old. And the floorboard was creaking. It's like, what's that? I was like, oh wow, that's the floor. That's incredible. I was like never actually walked on something that would creak. And they had all kinds of books and Pulitzer Prize winners and books by Black authors, by Asian Americans, and it was stunning. I didn't have the courage of going up there. Hey, do you have my books? I didn't have the courage to do that. I just got as many books as possible and bought the sweatshirt for my kids, bought the hat for my kids, and then left. But the second time I went there, it was just, the experience was just very warm, and I wanted to see my book there someday in Harvard Bookstore. And when I settled in Boston, I visited the Belmont Bookstore, and I this time I reached out to the owner, and she was very gracious, and she's like, "Okay, come in, let's do the book signing. You can sign the books, and we'll put them in the bookstores." And when my third book, The Last Rose of Shanghai, was published, they did that. They actually had them on bookshelf, and it was so exciting to see my books there. So I'm very grateful to Belmont Books. I also discovered, you guys, in the bookstores in Boston, they have like a local bookshelf. Did you know that? Oh my goodness. I went to a consumer bookstore. There was like local author shelf. I was like, wow, how exciting is that? You guys treat authors very nicely, I guess, and it's very encouraging to see that.
It's a great way to discover local writers and new writers, because I think indie bookstores do a terrific job at promoting writers in the area. So I'm glad that you found that.
Yeah.
And so we'll put links to Belmont Books below. You mentioned Harvard Bookstore. I know we have
Harvard Bookstore, yes.
And then Concord Bookshop we haven't had, but we can put the link below for people to check them out. That's great to hear. I'm curious, Weina, did you always want to be a writer? Was that something you had always wanted to do?
Yes, Kimberly, I always wanted to be a writer. Actually, always wanted to be a storyteller. I think I wanted to be a novelist when I was like in third grade.
Okay.
I started to write something, like wanted to write a novel. Of course, it didn't happen, and I published my first short story when I was in fifth grade, and I made my first like 5 RMB, which was like $1 royalty. It was amazing experience for me, and I think in a way if I don't write, I don't know what else to do. So this is what I do, I guess, and I'm very fortunate to be able to devote my time on writing and make up stories and think about characters and all stuff like that.
Tell me, as someone who grew up in China, you came to the U.S. when you were 24.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is it like for you to write in English? Do you ever dream of your characters in Chinese? How does that work? You having these two languages in your head when you write?
I think if you ask people who are bilingual, people will give you different answers. Everybody will have different answers. For me, I came here when I was 24, and I went to graduate school in Texas, Women's University. And in a way, because of the demand of school, I had to be efficient. So I trained my mind to think and speak and write in English, so I don't have to take a detour from Chinese to English, from English to Chinese. So I had to do that. So after I finished the process in the graduate school, I completely forgot about Chinese. And I just thought and write and spoke in English. So in Texas, it was somehow I went on by like for 20 years like that, because my husband doesn't speak Chinese. And every time if I speak Chinese, it would confuse him. I would have to repeat. So it's like, so I just completely switched it to English. And now I came here. There are many Chinese Americans here. I was so shocked. And my kids started to take Chinese lessons, and they started to speak Chinese to me. And I switched to Chinese. It was fine. It's fine. And I think I can switch back and forth. As long as I don't write in Chinese, I'm fine.
Okay. Fascinating. That's really fascinating to me. When you read, when you read books, not books you've written, but other books, do you read in English or do you read in Chinese?
I only read them in English, unless there's something, the original resources, I have to verify the original source, then I have to read them in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you reading now, or what books are you looking forward to reading in 2022?
Oh, I'm actually rereading A Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh, that's such a good book.
I read it like 4 years ago, and I thought, oh my God, that's such a great book. But I have this deadline. I cannot read it every sentence. For me, I usually read them every word in the novel. So I think I just swallowed the whole thing. But then now I came back, and I really savor every sentence. And the author really has a way of evoking all those old tradition, and it was humorous, but it was sophisticated, and it was wonderful.
It is wonderful book. And we'll put the link to getting that, A Gentleman in Moscow, Immortals. We'll put that below for people who might want to check it out. Weina, you are also a tall poppy writer.
Yes,
had tall poppy writers on A Mighty Blaze before. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Tall Poppies? Because that's a great way, if you're looking to discover new books, is to check out the Tall Poppy writers.
Oh, yes. Tall Poppy Writers is a group of very supportive female authors, and we usually spend a lot of time supporting each other. We every time when somebody has a new book come out, we go on the social media and we give them a very big shout out. And other than that, we also support each other. Like if you have agent problem, we talk about that. And we also organized a competition last year. We actually review those submissions and give them advice. And we authors, we did not take any profit from that, but we just wanted to make sure that as an aspiring writer, you have us to support you if you need us. And I usually organize the Booktube, which is an online media where we will review the books and we will also recommend books by other authors. It doesn't have to be tall puppies. We recommend all kind of historical novels and thrillers, mysteries by other authors, and we are always happy to do that because we are all writers, and sometimes we feel like you guys are our best friends. We need to be there for you.
Terrific.
Yeah, it can be a lonely process when you are writing. So,
but we want everyone to read The Last Rose. It's wonderful that we can recommend them other books, but we want everyone to read The Last Rose of Shanghai. What would you like your readers, when they turn to the last page, what do you hope they take away from this book?
I would like them to think the friendship between Chinese and those people in a very disadvantaged situation. And the Chinese and the Jewish people have a lot in common, actually. And Chinese, even though that was in a very unique situation, the Chinese were very friendly, and the local in Shanghai, they accepted people even though they were foreigners, and they coexisted. This is some kind of message I think we wanted to hear right now.
I think we all need to hear that. Now tell me, are you working on something else?
Yes, I am. I actually was.
You were.
I was stuck this morning, and I was very grumpy this morning because there was one scene. I was like, I don't think this works. So my next book is called The Angels of Vienna. It's set in Vienna, and it's also a World War II novel. And it's, you can say, it's kind of a prequel to Last Rose of Shanghai.
Ooh.
Kind of, but not exactly. It's just before that.
The Angel of Vienna.
Yes.
Okay, so The Angels of Vienna. Okay, Joe, our producer, got the title below for people to want to put that on their must-read list when Weina's all done, and that's the world. Until then, definitely check out The Last Rose of Shanghai. And again, we'll put the link below the broadcast for people to click so they can make sure to get their own copy. Thank you so much for being with us today, Weina.
Oh, thank you so much, Kimberly. This is fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Very happy to have you. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked today's show, and we hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blazes page on Facebook to get notified about all of our author interviews and all of our other events. Or you can hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for a newsletter. It goes out every Monday and gives you a rundown of all of our interviews for the week. And we'll be back here in 2 weeks. We're taking next week off. So in 2 weeks, we'll be back for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. And thanks for being here.